Well, I want to thank Liz and Ian and Alan and all the other organizers of this conference. I think it's a very special conference, a very important conference, one I was delighted to travel across the ocean to be here for, even spend some of my carbon footprints on that, because I think it's very important that we honor our prophets before they leave us, while they're alive. One of the great mentors to Thomas Berry was, of course, Teilhard de Chardin. And Teilhard de Chardin, where most of his books weren't even allowed to be printed before he died. Or consider the great Julian of Norwich, whose book was not published until 300 years after she died. So Thomas Berry has something going for him. We're honoring him even now. But more important, and Berry would be the first one to say this, it's not really about honoring Thomas Berry. It is about awakening our own sense of truth, spirit. And Satish has done such a beautiful job of inspiring us and challenging us, setting a tone for the entire day, indeed for the rest of our lives. So my happy task is to say a few words about Thomas Berry's contribution to reinventing spirituality. And of course, just that very term suggests that something is amiss in the world of religion, the world over. You know, the Dalai Lama says that education is in crisis the world over. And I find that very comforting, that it's not just an Oakland problem or a California problem or an American problem or even a Western problem that education is in crisis. It's a human situation, as Satish was talking about. Of course education is in crisis because our species is in crisis. Everything has to change, and that is what Berry is saying. And I would say, not only is education in crisis the world over, but that religion is in crisis the world over. Islam has a problem, Christianity has a problem, Hinduism has a problem, Buddhism has a problem, the indigenous people have their problems. And of course, the solution to religion's problems has always been spirituality, because that is the heart and the essence of any religion when it's being true to itself. And of course, Jesus came along at a time when his religion was in trouble, as Buddha came along at a time when Hinduism was in trouble. And Martin Luther King came along in a time when Christianity in America was in trouble. And Gandhi came along in a time when Hinduism was in trouble, etc. So we're living in a time when the religious consciousness of humanity has to wake up, has to be reinvented, reborn, simplified. And the name for simplification of religion has been spirituality. And Thomas Berry helps us so much, and I would like to name 7 or 8 areas in which he helps us to simplify. We have to carry spirituality much lighter into the 21st century. We don't have to carry 2,000 years of ecclesial history on our backs in the West. In fact, we can't afford to. There isn't enough time left for our species. We have to simplify, not just our economic lives, as Satish was talking about, but our religious lives, our spiritual lives. And Thomas Berry helps considerably. First, he names for us the context for all human efforts, including spirituality. And that context is the cosmology itself. It is creation itself. As he says in his book on the great work that the Satish Kumar so recommended, he says that in the immense story of the universe, that so many of these dangerous moments have been navigated successfully is some indication that the universe is for us rather than against us. The universe is for us rather than against us. In 14 billion years of history, our species had been blessed long before we arrived, because the universe made decisions time and time again on our behalf. without which we would not have arrived. This earth would not have happened. The fine-tuning of oxygen that was so necessary for our delicate lungs would not have occurred. Many, many, many decisions from the first millisecond of the fireball have been on our behalf. Einstein was asked years ago, what's the most important question you can ask in life? And his answer was, is the universe a friendly place or not? Thomas Berry has answered that question to the best of his ability. Yes, it has been a benign, not a benign journey, a benign place, the universe, not without terror. But that's the whole point, as Rilke the poet says, beauty and terror go together. We do not live in a pretty universe, folks. We live in a beautiful universe. And that implies terror. And that's why, as Satish made the point, as a young man, he faced death. He faced that ultimate terror that is the archetype of all the other terrors. Once you pass through that, facing that deepest of all fears is precisely when we take on a spiritual center. So by placing our history in the context of the history of the universe, and of course the history of Earth, Thomas Berry has reset the stage for all our religions to wake up, to simplify themselves, to clean their acts, and for each individual among us to find our center. I believe that the modern age, which began with the invention of the printing press in the late 15th century, was about text. It was all about text. And Satish talked about this. Even though an editor of a famous journal, he dared to say reading isn't everything. Text is not everything. Context is what the postmodern age is about, folks. And this is where Thomas Berry has helped us so profoundly by moving us from text to context. And Satish was talking about to read nature, not about nature, but to go into nature, including your own nature, and read it because nature itself is yearning to teach us. As his mother, who was without text because she was illiterate, just like Jesus was illiterate and without text. But he immersed himself in the context of the sacredness of creation, and it is in that context that Jesus found a profound message for many. And so Thomas Berry says about this universe and us, he says the small self of the individual reaches its completion in the great self of the universe. We are made for the universe itself. This is an echo of a second mentor of Thomas Berry, which is that of Thomas Aquinas. Time and again, Thomas Berry has told me how significant in his life it has been for him to have been named after Thomas Aquinas. And Thomas Aquinas said, every human being is capax universi, capable of the universe. Our souls are cosmic in size. But when we live in a culture that through the industrial and the modern age has set corporations up, McDonald's up, plastic up, and the malls up, as somehow the archetypal temples for our souls, what really happens is that our souls shrink. We become smaller than we really are, and far smaller than our ancestors were, because they related to the universe. And this is part of the wisdom of the indigenous people that has been invoked in Thomas Berry's name, beginning with Liz's comments this morning and echoed with those of Satish. So what Thomas Berry is pointing out, that we now live in an era when Father Sky can be responded to once again. And what we're learning about Father Sky today is phenomenal, thanks to Hubble telescope and other explorations. During the modern age, we were told the universe is essentially a machine that the sky was a junkyard for machine parts. It was dead and inert out there. And I think in that context, we shrunk our souls, especially men, because we had no place to invest our greatness. And it is in this context I think that violence and war has achieved whole new geometric proportions in human history because we were no longer connected to the universe. Our psyches had no cosmic bride, no cosmic husband to relate to. All that is shifting today, of course, and Thomas Berry is one of the pioneers to point this out to us. He says, a constant awareness of the spatial context of life gives to human beings a deep security. But to move from the abiding spatial context of personal identity to a sense of identity with an emergent universe is a transition that has even now not been accomplished in any comprehensive manner by any of the world's spiritual traditions. There is a challenge there for every spiritual tradition to reawaken itself to its own cosmic dimensions. And this will mean a cleaning up of our religious heritages for sure, and a simplifying. It is there in the heart. As the Native American teacher Black Elk puts it, that he says, true peace begins in the heart, with the heart's relationship to the universe. To the universe. If we do not have a heart relationship to the universe, folks, we will never be at peace. We will never be peacemakers, because we are not living in peace. We are living in pieces. Anthropocentric pieces of shopping and competing. And as Satish was saying, beating up on one another with our superiority complexes, whether of race, of gender, of nationalism, of economics, or speciesism. So that's the first gift from Thomas Berry, and it's a huge one. To reset our entire cosmology, our entire spirituality in the context of cosmology. And from a theological point of view, of course, this is simply declaring, redeclaring, re-understanding that the great temple of God is the temple of the universe. Every other temple, mosque, church, cathedral, whatever, is merely a microcosmic expression of the great temple of the universe. And the temple of the universe, as Berry insists, is not just spatial. It is historic. It's moving. It's moving along. It's expanding. It's growing. It's dying. And it's being reborn. All those mysteries are part of the history that we are on board for, because we are the drama. We are part of the theater that the temple of the universe is about. And the temple is not a noun. The temple is a verb. A second gift of spirituality that Thomas Berry helps name for us is that the moral choices we make, these are about the local place in the cosmos that we call Earth, that we call this planet. As Berry says, ecology is functional cosmology. So ecology is about what's going on in our hood, in our neighborhood. And our neighborhood is the Earth. The Earth is part of the big cosmic going on. But it is here that we will challenge all our professions to be morally based again. You are not a lawyer. You are not an educator. You are not a priest. You are not a healer, a doctor, a nurse for your own ego. You are committing yourself to serve with the skills, with the history, with the ancestry of your profession. We are all here to be healers in some way. And ecology as functional cosmology means that we redo all of our professions, all of our work in the context of the sacredness of the universe, the sacredness of this earth, and the sacredness of the generations to come. That it is the ones not yet born, who are the real judges of our morality today. And morality is about choice. It is about our choice of behavior. Just as Satish ended his talk with his challenge, that we fill the jails and that we do the protest that King did in his Reformation, that Gandhi did in his, and so forth, that these are choices we make to choose the path of right behavior, the path of sustainability. I would propose that sustainability is a 21st century word for justice. Because justice is all about balance. Justice is all about harmony. Justice is about finding the equilibrium within society, within human societies, connecting to other societies, to other species, and within one's own self and one's own local relationships. So justice cuts through all relationships. As Satish said, friendship presumes justice. Meister Eckhart said that in the 14th century, says, there is no love between master and slave. There can only be love, he said, where there is equality or where there is a struggle for equality. That's friendship, as Satish was talking about it. And Thomas Aquinas, who was mentor both to Thomas Berry and to Meister Eckhart, said that all beings in the universe are questing for friendship. All beings love one another, he said. And when we get back to this understanding of ourselves as beings, as Satish proposed, not just as male, female, gay, straight, professional, unprofessional, employed, unemployed, English, British, what have you, or Hindu, Buddhist, Muslim, what have you. We go deeper, deeper, deeper to the level of being. That is where morality itself is going to wash us anew with the energy and the inspiration to make a difference. So what Berry has done then, by saying that cosmology, ecology is functional cosmology, is to reset our moral base. And again, this is very indigenous, because among indigenous people, and by indigenous people I don't mean just the Native Americans, I also mean the Celtic people, surely, of the European lands, and of course African wisdom too. But indigenous people do not have this, seem to have this disease of wandering into speculative thinking, thinking for the sake of thinking. For them, all thinking leads to behavior. Behavior is what morality is about. How are we behaving or misbehaving? How does what we think about the universe and about the earth and about our bodies, how does it translate into our everyday behavior? Perhaps this quiz that Satish told us about, where 27% weren't interested in environment, maybe if they hadn't used the word environment, but they said, are you interested in food? They would have gotten 100%. Environment sounds like an abstraction. But the truth is, the food comes from the environment. Duh. And most of us try to have it about 3 times a day. It's a pretty intimate relationship, what we choose to eat and don't eat, and why not. A third gift from Thomas Berry about spirituality, and it's quite a shocking gift if you put this to many Christian types, is a phrase that he's used more than once. He says we should put the Bible on the shelf for 20 years. Now, this is a radical statement for someone who comes out of a Christian tradition, or it seems to be. But he's pointing out several things here. First of all, that religion goes to war over the silliest things, like holy books, that in fact contradict themselves and always have to be interpreted by every generation because they're full of metaphors, and no metaphor can be interpreted literally. One thing I've learned late in life is this, folks. Everything important in life is a metaphor, which is another way of saying that literalism is never important. Think of it. Love is a metaphor. Spirit is a metaphor. God is a metaphor. Sex is a metaphor. Death is a metaphor. If you can't think metaphorically, you're not even here yet. And to try to turn the Bible into a literal canon of laws is an insult to everyone who contributed to that amazing document. And also it's an insult to your own intelligence and to the God who created you with intelligence. Put the Bible on the shelf for 20 years, he says. What is Thomas Berry telling us? His mentor, Thomas Aquinas, said this. He said, Revelation comes in 2 volumes, the Bible and nature. What Thomas Berry is telling us is that the revelation of nature has been shelved for hundreds of years in the West. We put nature on a shelf, and we go to war over the Bible, or over the new Bibles, such as our economic playbooks. For example, how many seminaries of any denomination in the West have mystical scientists on their faculty? In my program that I ran for 29 years, we had that all the time. I hired mystical scientists. They're much more interesting than biblical theologians. I'll tell you, they are. They're not all wrapped up in languages and words. They're looking out at the cosmos. They're looking at God's creation. They're looking at the temple. The real temple, not the human temple. They're looking at the sacredness of being. So that's just one obvious test. I say not only should we put the Bible on the shelf for 20 years, we should shut down every seminary in the world for at least 6 months and reinvent seminary education. So it starts from the revelation of nature. Because, folks, the revelation of nature is 14 billion years older than the Bible. And what kind of an insult is it to the Creator to say that the Bible, which is a book about 2,500 years old, is the only source of revelation? And don't think I'm not talking about something very practical, folks, especially in England, where the Anglican Church today is burning itself down over the so-called issue of homosexuality. This homosexuality issue is an issue of science. The Bible is no more qualified to tell us about the morality of homosexuality than it is to tell us about whether the earth goes around the sun or the sun goes around the earth. And I thought we wrestled with these issues 400 years ago. Now the current and past Pope were all excited. Well, the one was, the Pope John Paul II, 25 years ago when he lifted the 400-year condemnation of Galileo. He was very proud of himself. We all held our breath for that one, didn't we, for 400 years? And when he did that, the Pope said, well, there's a lesson here, that religion is something to learn from science. Well, he's right about that, but he hasn't learned the lesson. Because he, like the present Pope, has contributed to the ongoing bashing of gays. This bishop in Africa that is leading the crusade to destroy the Anglican Church in the name of homophobia said this summer, he said, and I quote, well, homosexuality is unnatural, unquote. Well, has he consulted scientists about that? Because that's what scientists do. They explore the nature of things. And what science has found is, so far they've counted 464 other species with homosexual populations, including dolphins, dogs, cats, many birds, and goes on and on and on. So it's not unnatural, it's natural. It's a minority, but it's natural for that minority. What would be unnatural would be condemning that minority into heterosexual marriages when they're not geared to that. So this is a scientific question, this very question that is burning down about half of the Western religions at this time in history. Are we going to consult science, or are we going to hide in our man-made books? A fourth contribution of Thomas Berry to spirituality is his sense of the aesthetic. He mentioned it here in his brief video, but you find it all throughout his work. He breaks into a poetic mode. He breaks into a paean to beauty, time and time and time again. He cannot help it. In his most recent book called Evening Thoughts, Thomas Berry says this. He says, every being exists in intimate relation with other beings and in a constant exchange of gifts with each other. But this relationship is something beyond pragmatic use. It is rather a mutual sharing of existence in the grand venture of the universe itself. A beautiful phrase, the grand venture. Indigenous peoples perceive the universe as a single gorgeous celebration. Notice, the universe is not just in existence, it is gorgeous. It is put on clothes of beauty, of color, of diversity. And let me point out, homosexuality is part of the universe diversity, so get over it. If you don't have an aesthetic consciousness, you will never understand the grace of diversity. But nature does understand the grace of diversity. The gorgeous celebration, a cosmic liturgy, he says, that humans enter through their ritual dances at those moments of daily and seasonal change, at dawn and sunset, and at the equinox and solstice moments. And he says the interior world of the psyche, the anima, the soul, the spirit, or the mind, provides a basis for that interior presence that we experience with each other in the world of living. He says the world is so beautiful, you cannot, just as you cannot reduce sight to refinement of the physical impression carried by the light that strikes the eye, you cannot reduce communication inherent in a Mozart symphony to vibration of the instruments of which it is played. So you cannot reduce the beauty of interaction between all beings of the universe and, of course, between each one of us. So let me point out to you that beauty is one of Thomas Berry's most often used terms, and for good reason. Bell Hooks, the African-American philosopher and poet, says that the next revolution will be a revolution in aesthetics. And she says, if you want to connect the intellectual classes with the lowest classes, the issue is aesthetics. She says the poorest of the poor are busy thinking about aesthetics, thinking about beauty. And don't think this is not a revelation and a revolution, folks, because Descartes, the philosopher of modern Western thinking and academia even to this day, has a whole philosophy with no philosophy of aesthetics. It's embarrassing. It's embarrassing. I don't know any philosopher, lover of wisdom the world over who attempted a philosophy that did not talk about beauty. The West has attempted it, and that is why we're paying the price today world over for the degradation of the beauty of the planet and all its diverse species, indeed the beauty of our own bodies. Another contribution from Thomas Berry is his emphasis on creativity. This, we now know, is a law of the universe. From the immediate get-go of the universe, 14 billion years ago, this universe has been birthing, and birthing. It is profoundly immersed in creativity. How different this is from Newton's view of the universe. that was the universe was a machine and essentially done, and we were here to fit in and be obedient? Didn't that set us up for the militarism of the 20th century, that obedience was a way to fit into the universe? Well, break it down, folks. Deconstruct it. It ain't so. It was a mistake. What the universe sets us up for is creativity. As Meister Eckhart said in the 14th century, what does God do all day long? God lies on a maternity bed giving birth. It's a bias in the heart of the universe, the bias for creativity. And Thomas Berry puts it so beautifully in his book on the great work, and I cited this at a critical part in my book on creativity that I wrote a couple years ago. He connects creativity to wildness, He says, wildness we might consider as a root of the authentic spontaneities of any being. It is that wellspring of creativity. Notice, the wildness in you, and you, and you is your wellspring of creativity. Any spirituality worthy of a name brings us back to the wellspring of our creativity, to our wildness. It is that wellspring of creativity whence come the instinctive activities that enable all living beings to obtain their food, to find shelter, to bring forth their young, to sing and dance and fly through the air and swim through the depths of the sea. This is the same inner tendency that evokes the insight of the poet, the skill of the artist, and the power of the shaman. Yes, folks. Notice how we marry so beautifully what the whales are doing, what the flowers and the trees are doing, and what the poets and the shamans and we are doing. It all comes from one wellspring of creativity, our shared wildness. A spirituality that does not lead us to the fountains of wildness and the sources of our creativity is not a spirituality. It is a control chip. It is part of the problem and in no way part of the solution. Because I believe that all human solutions to the corner into which we've painted ourselves today of ecological degradation and so forth, all our solutions are going to come from our creativity. Creativity is the strongest thing our species has going for it. It is also the most dangerous thing our species has going for it. With our creativity, we can build gas ovens, and we have. We can build nuclear bombs, and we have. We can build nuclear submarines, and we have. But we could tear down rainforests in a day that has taken God and nature 10,000 years to give birth to and will never be repeated, will never be replanted. We do that with our creativity. And we also can reinvent the way we live on the planet with different forms of energy, different forms of transportation, with simpler lifestyles and so forth. All that is about our creativity. Another gift from Thomas Berry is his critique, bold critique of education. Satish was pretty bold when he called Oxford and Cambridge places of ignorance. Thomas Berry has a phrase, academic barbarism. Academic barbarism. It's a very strong phrase. He was fired, by a Jesuit university, Fordham University, because they said what he was teaching was not Christian enough. Well, the truth is, what he was teaching was exactly the teaching of the cosmic Christ. That the Christ is present in every being in the universe, just as the Buddha nature is. You see, the omnipresence of the sacredness of our relationship to all things. But Fordham University, even though peopled by many Jesuits, had lost, as had all of Western Christianity, the tradition of the cosmic Christ for about 300 or 400 years because they lost the cosmos. How are you going to understand the cosmic Christ if you don't have a cosmos? Duh. Teilhard de Chardin, when he died, 4 people went to his funeral. 10 years after he died, a friend of mine, Jose Habde, a Seneca woman, was teaching in a Jesuit seminary of his province in New York. And she said, tomorrow is Teilhard's 10th anniversary of Teilhard's death. Let's go visit his grave. And these young seminarians, young men in their 20s, said, who is Teilhard? Jesuits, 10 years after Teilhard died, had never heard of him. Well, she rented a bus and got them to the grave site and, of course, taught them who Teilhard was. Academic barbarism. Wow. Barbarians at the wall with PhDs. Ah! Thomas Berry says most of the destruction on the planet is happening at the hands of people with PhDs. That's why it's barbarism. Barbarism is strong. Barbarism attacks. Barbarism is violent. It has weapons. A PhD can be a weapon. If you've only educated the left side of your brain, you are a dangerous person. Your culture is a dangerous culture. And your education is extremely dangerous. For 29 years, I've been trying to reinvent education with adults. And the key to it, I have learned, is bringing in the creativity, what we call art as meditation, and bringing the body back to education. And balancing the right hemisphere of the brain with the left hemisphere, getting that dialectic going again, so that when we give degrees, it's not just for the left brain, it includes the right brain, which operates the heart and connects to all the chakras, not just one side of the left head chakra. Now I've chosen to work with young people, inner city kids, and I've linked up with a rapper and filmmaker, Professor Pitt, we call him. And together we're working with inner city kids. Pitt grew up in the ghetto of Milwaukee, and he learned Kung Fu when he was 10. Kung Fu saved his life, literally. And then he went on to learn Tai Chi, Qigong, and other spiritual forms of bodily prayer. And he said he'd been looking for years for someone with content. Then he found me, and he says, you're the guy. So we're linking up, and we're now helping to, we want to reinvent education from the inner city out, from the bottom up. You can go online and find out more about this. My latest book is on education called The Awe Project, standing for Ancestral Wisdom Education, but also for awe, bringing awe back. That's what awakens the right brain, is awe. And this is why Thomas Berry's work is so important for education. And what Katish was saying, to get our hands into the earth, our hands into nature again. And of course, when you awaken awe, you awaken reverence, and you awaken gratitude. With that, then we would be releasing people on the earth that are not violent, that are not selling their souls to chemical corporations or to people who tear down rainforests. Reconnecting conscience and education, conscience and consciousness. It is possible. So you can go on my website, just matthewfox.org, and learn more about the Awe Project. And we call it Yell Awe, Youth and Elder Learning Laboratory for Ancestral Wisdom Education. And we hope to start out in the St. Petersburg, Florida. 76% of black boys do not graduate from high school. Now you tell me, does that mean these boys are stupid? Or does it mean the adults running education are stupid? That we don't provide the variety of forms of education that are appropriate for a diverse species like ours. All studies in America show the most creative kids in America are inner city kids. And they're the ones most dying, literally dying, from bad education. Because in the ghetto, when you don't have education, incarceration follows. And I have an essay on my webpage, Education versus Incarceration. And to me, these kids are the canary in the mine. It's just what the Dalai Lama says. If we can't change education, our species is doomed. And what Satish is pointing out, and what Thomas Berry is pointing out, is very radical. It's not about tinkering with education. It's about changing it. And of course, Anita Roddick who was so appropriately remembered this morning. She, of course, was very committed to alternative education, both the University of Bath, which we'll be hearing more about today, but certainly in my programs too. She often came to our university, etc., etc. She was one of those prophets who could see on the horizon that we had to do education differently. Our species is that kind of species, you know. Except for fish, we're the only ones that go to school. And we have to ask, is school part of the problem? You bet it is. Of course it is. Duh. But adults run schools, so adults have to wake up. This is where your spirituality hits the road in reinventing our professions, of which school is, I call school the funnel through which we pass so many of our professionals. They all go to school. That's what they have in common. That's what makes us dangerous. We have to change that funnel, and it can be done. What I've learned from 29 years of working with adults, and some of you are here today, graduates of our program, is that tremendous things can happen in a week or two. One fellow came in our program a few years ago. He's been teaching engineering at a great university in America for 29 years. He came in burned out by education and burned out by engineering, ready to quit both. In 2 weeks, he came to me and said, I found my soul. He went back to his school. He started Engineers Without Borders, where they're sending engineers to Haiti, to the Amazon, to Africa to help people create solar-generated irrigation systems and all the miracles that engineers can do when they have their hearts on board. He has had a conference every year. Last year, 900 people came to his conference from 92 countries, many of them with inventions, simple inventions of purifying water and all the basic things that a third of the world, 2/3 of the world is without today. All this happened because he underwent a 2-week shift in education. So don't tell me we can't change education. You're not going to change it by going to the school boards and going through all the politics of it. No. You're going to change it by creating other forms of school. And then people are going to realize, hey, there's another way to do this. Another contribution of Thomas Berry is that of, what does that mean? That we're supposed to stop now for talk? Before we have discussion? Oh, that's too bad. Well, just a word about ecumenism, deep ecumenism. Thomas Berry is a gatherer, like Joseph Campbell was, of the wisdom, the spiritual traditions of the world. He learned Native American languages. His fellow Passionist priests thought he was a crazy guy. In fact, Tom Berry told me more than once, the only one of his brothers who would talk to him was a lay brother who drove the tractor. Everyone else thought he was crazy. What is he doing learning Native American languages, learning Chinese, studying science? Well, what he was doing was using the mind God gave him, looking for solutions to the obvious problems of our time. So the way that Thomas Berry called on the Native American wisdom, but he also called on the other wisdom of the world without throwing overboard his own tradition as a Christian. Thomas Berry was very nimble politically, you must understand. He was not kicked out of the Catholic priesthood, which I think is not necessarily something in his favor. But he's a clever man, this guy. He would write books and put them in his drawer for years. And very interesting. But the point is that he had this awareness that God does not speak through just one tradition, and especially if that tradition has been misinterpreted for centuries. God speaks, of course, through nature and through all the world traditions. And of course, even then, as he points out, none of our religions has all the answers. And even if we gather the wisdom of all, that's not enough today. We have to bring in the wisdom of science, and I would say, yes, the wisdom of technology. And even then, we have to give birth to new forms of worship, to new forms of celebration, to new forms of forgiveness, of grieving, yes, of grieving. And I was very inspired in terms of my work with the Cosmic Mass to do that kind of thing, to create new forms of worship. And I've seen people's hearts turn very fast. You see, that's what healthy liturgy, healthy ritual does. It is the shortcut to bringing the universe in. And you do it with aesthetics, with beauty, with joy, with wonder. I want to talk more about this Monday night at St. James, and I'm lecturing on alternatives. And I also want to say a word about Anita Roddick, too. When I was flying over here yesterday, I was sketching an essay on why the saintliness of Anita Roddick appeals to me more than the saintliness of Mother Teresa. I want to compare the two ladies. They were both very strong women of the last part of the 20th century, and both very spiritual. But they're also very different in their approaches to spirituality. And I think that Anita Roddick is truly one of the great gifts of England to our world at this time. And what she did in taking, many times when I introduced Anita, I compared her to Joan of Arc. Because she took on what she called, and I think rightly so, the most powerful force on the planet today, which is business. And she challenged business with a conscience. And that's no small thing. And she took a lot of hits for doing that. She was one hell of a warrior. And I honor Anita Roddick. And she represents, I think, much of the contribution I've been speaking of from Thomas Berry. So, as Satish so beautifully told us, the great work that Thomas Berry calls us to is to put our spirituality into action. That spirituality without action is not spirituality. Love without action is not love. Love without affecting our behavior is not effective love. And so Satish did a beautiful job of bringing that forward, and I know the other speakers will too, in applying Thomas Berry's cosmology and deep insights to law, to education, and to other themes. So with that then, I want to close. I just want to say thank you to Thomas Berry. I realize I've known Thomas for 26 years. And the very first time I met him, we were sloshing through the snow in Chicago and going to supper. And he said, well, what are you doing now? I said, I'm researching this lady called Hildegard of Bingen, writing a book on Hildegard of Bingen. And then he went off talking about Hildegard of Bingen. He was the only two-legged one I'd ever met who knew Hildegard of Bingen at that time. And this is the way Thomas was. He was the real meaning of an intellectual. And by intellectual, I don't mean someone who masturbates ideas. I mean someone in the Celtic tradition, like the Celtic tradition, who shakes up our tiredness, the tiredness in our institutions, in our education, in our religions. This prophetic thinking, who interferes. That's what prophets do. They interfere. Thomas interfered profoundly. And that is why all of us are here today, and all of us feel called to be agents of transformation ourselves, because Thomas Berry has indeed blessed us. I would like to close the way I closed. In his presence, a few years ago, there was a conference sponsored by the California Institute of Integral Studies, and I did a talk on Thomas Berry, and I have to say I was glad that I had Brian Swim crying after my talk. But here is how I close that talk, and I'd like to close it here in England this way. If human history survives, and our species survives into the 22nd century, I believe that history will record that among us a certain prophet rose in the latter part of the 20th century, imbued with the spirit of Teilhard de Chardin, the intellect of Aquinas, the eros of Hildegard, the humility of Francis, the science of Einstein, and the courage and imagination of Jesus. His name was Thomas Berry. We remember him by carrying on his vision, by building institutions and movements, and infiltrating all of our professions, from education to politics, to business to worship, with his many and sustainable visions, and surely spirituality. Thank you.